Hey guys, Will here. So it's been about 9 months now, believe it or not, since we put together our triple 65-inch 4K sim rig. And we took you through the process of building everything, how everything kind of went together at the time. And since then, we've kind of been putting together a series of videos where we've taken you through individual components of the system and what we've learned in the 9 months that we've been using them so far. So today's focus is going to be the Next Level Racing Traction Plus system, which is what you can see down the bottom here. Everything else except the screens is sitting on top of this, and it moves us from side to side and gives us the sensation of traction loss inside the system. Now, there's a couple of different types of people that are going to be watching this video. There's going to be those who are interested in maybe purchasing one of these for themselves. It is a very expensive piece of equipment, $10,000 Australian or about 6,500 US dollars. So it's not a small investment. We really want to take the time today to give you, I guess, a good picture of the fundamentals that you're going to want to consider at least before sinking that kind of money into something to further immerse you into the world of sim racing. So we're going to cover those guys. We're also going to just give you a better picture today for those who just might be interested in what something like this is actually like to drive with. So hopefully by the end of today's video, you'll have a better picture of what the product's like. And also I wanted to address a couple of little things that have come up in the last 9 months since we've had the system as well. In particular, Niels Husingveld, who you guys will know from Husingveld Engineering, who make the awesome sim racing pedals that we reviewed a couple of days ago. He did a video back in April where he actually used some of our footage from our initial impressions and had some really interesting and valid points which he raised about motion and how it integrates into sim racing in general, particularly when we're talking about more compact systems like what we might have at home. So we're going to unpack that today as well, and I think you're going to be quite surprised by some of the things I have to say. So let's dive in and let's talk about the Next Level Racing Traction Plus. Okay, so come in a little bit closer. Let's have a look at how this actually works. So I'm going to flip around on this side. And basically what we have here is a platform, as the name suggests. So we've got the back section, a middle section, which is where our control and electronics all live, and then a front section, which is pretty much the same as the back section, and it all kind of just bolts together. Now, what I would suggest is if you wanted to understand more about how that works, definitely check out our initial video where we put everything together. That video also outlines the bracketry that comes with the product as well, instruction manuals, and how we actually went through the process of mounting our SimLabs P1X onto the system as well. But essentially what we have here is two sliders and then a plate sitting on each one of those sliders which can pivot. So it can kind of rotate on an axis like that. So what happens is the front and rear can both move independently. That gives you rear traction loss as well as front traction loss. So you get the sensation of understeer as well as oversteer. Oversteer more being in the rear of the car and understeer more being in the front of the car. So as you turn in, the front of the car can kind of plow outwards a little bit. And it does give you quite a realistic sensation in many ways. Now, to give you an understanding of the range of movement, you can see we've got hard limits on either side. So if I actually switch the rig on now, so I'll quickly lean down and switch it on, you'll see it do its initial calibration. So it's going to go to the left on the back and the right on the front. So you can see there the limits in terms of the range of movement that we have to work with. Now, obviously, with a product like this, it's intended for home use. There are going to be limitations and trade-offs. So it's always going to be a balance between, you know, bulk and size and cost and what it actually brings to the table in terms of immersion. Now, if you look at, you know, professional sim rigs that can cost millions of dollars, what they're going to do is they're going to create an environment where you can have almost infinite rotation, so you get more sustained G-force out of the system. Whereas this, basically, as you turn in, it moves, you get that initial sense of G-force as you're turning in, but then of course as you're cornering, it can't keep rotating and rotating and rotating, so you don't get that sensation of sustained G-force. So that's probably the main thing, or the main limiting factor with a system like this. And again, it's going to come down to space, cost, and, you know, all those kinds of factors, power requirements as well, of course. But that's probably the most important and most fundamental limitation of a system like this. That's the most important thing to understand. Now, before we jump in and go for a drive, there is one other hard limitation that we do need to mention straight off the bat as well. There is a weight limit of 235 kilograms. Now, that might sound like a lot, but remember, of course, you do need to subtract the weight of the driver. So for me, at the moment, I'm a bit out of shape. I'm about 90 kilograms. So I am starting to push the limits of what this is capable of. Once we add in the seat mover system that we have on here, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, the big Simucube 2 Ultimate, the HE Ultimate pedals, as well as all the other ancillary components that are on this rig, we are getting very, very close to that weight limit. And remembering here that we don't actually have the monitors fixed to the rig either. And that's another element which we'll be talking about at length in just a moment. So yeah, you can imagine if we had the monitors and everything all mounted to this platform, that's going to push us way over the weight limit. So just another thing you do need to consider there, if you are on the larger side, you might be over the weight limit even with with just basic pedals, a wheelbase, seat, and a basic rig. So just something to consider there too. But let's jump in now. All the rest of the stuff we need to talk about really just comes down to software and driving experience. We're going to talk a little bit about integration, motion compensation, things like that too. So let's jump in. So let's quickly take a look at the software package. We run the Next Level Racing Platform Manager software. One of the things I have been really impressed with this software, it's the same software we run for the Next Level Racing Motion Platform V3 as well. So I've actually been running this software for almost 2.5 years now, and regular updates to the software, works really well. Never had any major bugs or anything that haven't been fixed very quickly at least. Firmware updates happen quite regularly as well that do genuinely improve the product over time. So really great support wise too. The only feature that's really missing, at least in my opinion, is just automatic game detection. So you can see here on the main interface the games that it's compatible with, and there's a huge list of different titles here, pretty much everything that you can imagine. And it has also just recently been updated with F1 2021 as well, which I think the update for this came out within a couple of days of the game actually being released. So they really are on top of integration of the latest and greatest when it comes to new sim titles, but it doesn't do auto detection. So when you change games, you do need to click on the game that you're using. At the moment, we've got iRacing selected, but say, for example, we're wanting to play Kartcraft, we click on that, click on activate, and then it activates that profile. So just as an example, let's click on iRacing now. We're not actually in iRacing, we're running a set of course, but this is just for background, so it doesn't matter. We'll go for a drive in iRacing in just a moment. So click on that, and we're presented with all the different settings that we have available. Now, as I mentioned before, the software does run for both the Traction Plus system as well as the Motion Platform V3. So if you only have the traction loss system, then you're only going to be interested in the settings that pertain to that. Because we do have both the systems here, the adjustments are going to be a little bit different here, but I wouldn't recommend you just copy my settings by any means. I get asked all the time to share my settings, and I really think that there's so much subjectivity here. It's going to depend on the type of rig you have as well, your height, how things are adjusted. I really think it's worth taking the time to really learn and understand how all this works so that you can, go in and do it yourself. And as we mentioned before, we do have another video where we went through all the different settings and what they mean. So we'll just quickly run you through it here. Let's start off with motion. These are all the settings that pertain to the Next Level Racing Motion Platform V3. So overall intensity, which is like a multiplier for everything else. We've got bump intensity, body roll gain, body pitch gain, vertical G-force gain, longitudinal G-force, lateral G-force, and weight transfer bias. So you can see here a general trend of turning things down here. Now the reason for that is that often with motion, less is a little bit more, and that's going to make a little bit more sense once we go for a drive in just a minute. You can also notice here, I've actually got my body pitch gain turned all the way down because I didn't like the sensation of the chair kind of pitching me forward and backwards depending on how the car was angled, because it's kind of not realistic because the wheel's not moving, the screens aren't moving, so it kind of just feels strange having the seat move when the rest of the car, at least in terms of the virtual world of the sim, isn't actually moving. But let's jump across now into oversteer, understeer. These are the settings that actually pertain directly to the traction loss system. So we can see here understeer effect intensity, vehicle understeer proneness, oversteer effect intensity, lateral G-force intensity, turning effect intensity, pivot point, low speed threshold, and then wheelbase, which is actually the wheelbase of the car that you're driving, or the distance between the front and rear axles. And I have found that to make quite a genuine difference in, I guess, the sense of realism that you get from the traction loss system. So what I would recommend is saving different profiles of different cars that you drive regularly. It does work, just having a kind of one size fits all approach to it, but if you really want to get in and get the best possible experience, again, remembering you are spending big dollars to get this system, it does pay to take the time and really dial these settings in and get them right. And we can see here again that general trend of having things turned down a little bit carries through to the traction loss system as well. Now, one other thing I did want to just quickly show you as well, if we click on back here, is under tools and diagnostics, we've got VR integration and then head position. Now, one of the things that this software does have out of the box, which is really fantastic, is motion compensation for VR. Now, obviously you can imagine if you're using a VR headset and your platform is physically moving around in space, then that movement is going to be picked up by the headset, and that can cause some weird things to go on with you kind of moving around inside the car, or the perspective being a little bit out of whack. So we do have compensation for that built right into the software, and it does work very, very well for VR. So you can see here a couple of measurements that we put in just for a position, and you can see it's all very clearly outlined in the software, so we know exactly what we're doing. And again, I would definitely recommend taking the time to make sure you get all these measurements right, because it does make a genuine difference in making sure you get the best possible experience out of the software. But as a broad stroke across the software, that's basically what you're getting, and you can see it's all very clean, very simple to use, and as we mentioned before, it does regularly see updates. Just going to quickly tab out of that again now. We've got a little thing here called the Action Center. And what happens with that is if there's a firmware update available or a software update, those will show up in here. You can simply download them, install them, and you're good to go. So very, very powerful software. As I said before, the only thing that I feel is kind of missing from this is the ability to auto detect those games and swap between them without having to click across to a different game if you do change titles. But let's jump in now and talk about what I think is most important. That is the driving experience. All right, so we're in the 911 Cup car in iRacing here at Mount Panorama. I wanted to just show you a couple of things from the driving experience. Now, the most important thing to understand here, I'm just going to stop in the middle of the straight here for a moment just to clarify a couple of things, because the different types of car that you're driving stipulate how well this works. And this is a good example because this car moves around a lot under braking. You do get the back end, the pendulum effect, I guess you'd call it, with the rear engine car kind of really wanting to get away from you and overtake you. So the sensation of traction loss or movement of the rear of the car is quite important in this car. And I found in particular, this was one of the cars where the traction loss system did actually help me quite genuinely feel a little bit of extra information and give my brain a little bit more sensation that I was able to use to adapt to what the car was doing and drive a little bit quicker and consistently. Now, to give you an idea of this, if we just sort of launch here in first gear, so get a little bit of movement here, you'll see as the car's kind of power sliding a little bit, you'll see the back end of the platform moving around a little bit. So we'll just launch here, and you can see as I kind of power slide, the back of the platform is just kind of sweeping a little bit from side to side. Now, it's not a whole lot, but it's just enough to give that sensation of movement. Remembering that we're not trying to simulate real-life G-force here, because we know from what we said earlier on, as soon as we try to simulate sustained G-force, we're going to hit a hard limit once we get to the end of the movement range, and it's just going to run out. And that's actually going to give us a detrimental effect, because the platform is going to stop moving all of a sudden, and you're going to be mid-corner, you're going to be getting a weird sensation that doesn't match reality. So you can see as I go around the bends, the platform's moving around a little bit, not a whole lot, just kind of giving me the sensation of what the rear of the car's doing. And as you saw before in the settings, I did have it turned down to probably about 60% of the full range. But it's just enough to give me that little tiny bit of detail. And I think that's really, you know, what I've found with this system over time is that's where the sweet spot is. When you see reviews of these things and, you know, you see them being used at trade shows and those kinds of scenarios, what tends to happen is the manufacturers wind all of these settings up to really give a dramatic effect and make it look like there's a lot going on. But my strong advice is that less is more when it comes to motion, and really just finding those finite little details and just giving your brain those little tiny cues that let it know what's going on and what's most important. So just coming into this braking zone here, high speed, we'll get a little bit of movement in the rear of the car. Back of the car is just kind of skating a little bit. And we just get that nice little bit of sensation. You can see there as well, when we come out of the bend, it kind of just snaps back into line. So we'll get a little bit of a power slide going here. So you can see, again, just that little bit of movement there. Now, that brings me into my next point, which is where I feel the weakness of this motion platform is, at least when it comes to road racing or high grip style racing. And this is more pronounced the higher the downforce, the higher speed car you have as well. So this car, again, is probably quite a good example, quite a good middle ground. So what you'll see happening is as I turn, as I start to get a little bit out of shape, so if I get a bit of a power slide happening again, didn't really get one going too much there, but we'll see if we can get one going through this next turn. You'll see the back of the car, the back of the platform steps out a little bit, but then because it has to return to center at some point, there we go. Because it has to return to center at some point, there you go again, that was a good example. What it does is it will do one of two things. So as the car starts to realign itself again, it's going to slowly drift back into center, and they've been smart enough with the firmware and software that happens gradually enough that it's not, you know, you don't really sort of get the sensation that the car's floating most of the time. But in a real car, if you get a snap oversteer moment where the car suddenly bites or the car suddenly slips and then bites again, what happens is when that car snaps back into line, you really feel that sensation very quickly. And because we are dealing with a finite amount of movement and range here, as well as the speed of the servo motors, what happens is you do get a little bit of a desync happening. What I mean by that is you feel that progressional traction loss, or that progression in the traction loss, you know, as the car starts to slide out sideways. But when it suddenly snaps back into line, the traction platform isn't able to respond quick enough to give a realistic sensation there. So what happens is, as soon as you get that happening, you get this kind of disconnect. And I'll see if I can kind of give you a bit of a simulation of it here. So a brake. So see there, when the car snapped back into line, the motion platform took a little bit longer to kind of drift back into the center again. Now, that is kind of the only area where the effect gets a little bit less realistic feeling. Where the feeling of breakaway is quite good, up to the point where you run out of range, of course. And remembering again that because we've dialed the settings down, because we've reduced that just to the minimum little amount of movement that just gives your brain that sense of what's going on, it's not quite so pronounced. But the moment you get that little bit of disconnect, it does kind of throw your brain out of whack a little bit. And that's where I guess the next problem is kind of created, because depending on what the car's doing, the way the platform is going to respond is going to be a little bit different in each scenario. So let's just pull up again so I can kind of concentrate and gather my thoughts a little bit here and explain this a little bit more clearly. So you can imagine if you're going through a chicane and you get a little bit out of shape in one direction, so you're kind of drifting one way, and then you're needing to transition the weight of the car across, or roll the weight of the car across so you can hook around and go the other direction through the S-bend. What happens is the traction platform might already be correcting for what the car's done in one direction, but then you throw it in the other direction, and again you get into this situation where the platform may be all the way actuated in one direction. You suddenly throw the car the other way, the car's starting to slide the other direction, and so the traction platform can't respond quick enough to flick all the way around the other way. So you end up in this situation where you're kind of sliding one direction and then sliding the other direction, but the platform's kind of taking its time to catch up. And because the transitional speed is going to vary depending on where you are on the track and what kind of corner you're going through, there can be a bit of a discrepancy there. And where that really becomes a problem is, if the car is in a slightly different weight transfer, in the same corner lap after lap, you might be experimenting with different lines and you're not really getting that consistent feel through the platform. So whereas with a steering wheel, and we'll just start driving again here, with a steering wheel, because you've got an infinite range of movement, the wheel can react in real time to whatever's going on, and it doesn't have those limitations, at least not with a high-end direct drive wheelbase, of being constrained to not being able to respond quick enough to be accurately detailing what the car's doing in real time. So as we come down the hill here again, let's see if I can give you a bit of a sense of what's going on. So I'm braking down, back of the car's getting a little light there, kind of out of shape a little bit, but not too much. Coming around, back this way again. And as I transition there, the car was kind of like, it was stepped out a little bit to the right, but then when I turned the other way, it took a little moment there. There was just a moment of, and you might not even see it on the camera, but there's this little moment of disconnect where I'm flicking the car the other way, but the platform hasn't been able to react fast enough to create that sensation. So it's only really a problem when you really wind up the details. So when you really wind up the effect, I guess. So when it's really sort of moving around a whole heap, the more it's deviating from dead center, the longer it's going to take to respond to change of direction and swing around the other way. So again, it comes down to kind of trying to dial it in so it's only moving that tiny little bit. And I guess the really important thing to understand here is that your brain does adapt to the cues that it's being given. And I guess, one really good way of understanding that is, we always talk about how people can drive incredibly fast on very entry-level sim racing gear, because as long as your brain is getting the cues it needs to understand what's going on with the car, it will adapt to whatever it's given. So you can feel a lot of these sensations through the steering wheel, which kind of, in a sense, negates the need for the motion platform when it comes to driving quickly. So what I've found, look, I'll be completely honest with you guys, the motion platform, although it does allow me to feel some little details that I might not necessarily otherwise be able to feel, as you mentioned at the start of this driving section, I haven't found that it's made me faster or more consistent overall. And I think that's just simply down to the fact that it's just taking the cues away from what I'm sensing in the wheel and moving them to a seat of the pants feel. So in simulators which give a good seat of the pants feel through the steering already, and iRacing, if you're using IRFFB, for example, that actually has a seat of the pants setting which you can dial into the wheel. Admittedly, I don't actually use that software, but I've got a good feel with iRacing, at least, of what the car's doing, and I can kind of react to the movement of the car both visually and with the wheel pretty naturally. Now, one of the things that a lot of racing drivers say is that you respond to seat of the pants feeling more quickly than you do visual cues. But look, my experience with the motion platform has been, as I said, it hasn't actually made me any faster or more consistent. I wouldn't say it's taken away from the driving experience or made me worse. I think a lot of people that say motion platforms make them slower is simply because they've got the settings turned up too high. There's too many things going on. There's too much sensory noise, I guess. And, it's pulling away from your brain being able to focus on those details that are important to driving fast and consistent. So definitely in terms of immersion, I think the key is have the settings turned down relatively low when it comes to street cars at least. And then, just kind of dial it in so you're only feeling the things that you need to feel and not kind of just filling the environment with noise and things that are unnecessary. I mean, you can crank it up if you're just after pure immersion and you just want to have a wild ride. That's fine. And I mean, some people might enjoy that. Some people might be buying one of these for that specific reason. But I think, in the context of sim racing and trying to drive as quickly as possible, less is definitely more. And I think, while the platform definitely does feel good, and it does add a couple of elements that might otherwise be missing, it's not really adding anything that you can't get in other ways. And, when you also combine that with the fact that it doesn't react fast enough to actually, mimic exactly what the car's doing, simply because, the servo motors can't respond fast enough to that change in direction, but also because you do have to compensate for the fact that you can't rotate infinitely and create those sustained G-forces. So yeah, if we just get underway again here quickly, I just want to go through a couple more corners, just to again give you that sense of what's happening here. So we'll fly down Conrod. And as I turn around to the right here, you'll see the motion platform will go to its point and then it'll just stop. So I feel the initial turn in, but then I don't have that sense of sustained G-force as I'm cornering, obviously, because the platform's not able to just rotate infinitely. So, while it's an obvious limitation of a home-based motion platform, you're never going to be able to have something in a house that's just going to, be able to create that sustained G-force sensation, at least not without other limitations. But, I think it does what it does extremely well. There's no taking away from that. It's just important to understand what the limitations are. And those limitations are, the limited range of movement, which makes sustained G-force sensation impossible, and also just that response time. So again, we'll get a little bit out of shape here, get the power down. There you go. You can see again, back end steps out, and I do feel that slide. But then as it starts to step back into line again, as we slide out here into the wall, that's actually a good example as well. You can see when I hit the wall there, it does actually jolt me around quite a bit. And that does, feel quite good, particularly in car-to-car battling when you're rubbing doors with other cars too. It does kind of give you that bouncing from side to side movement, which is quite immersive. But yeah, those are the limitations, at least when it comes to road racing. And again, depending on the style of car that you're driving will sort of stipulate the experience that you have. But this car is quite a good middle ground that kind of shows you a lot of those things. So let's jump onto a dirt track now. We'll talk a little bit more about the sensations you get when it comes to sliding a car, driving on dirt, rallying and things like that. And then we'll wrap up with our conclusions. All right, so quick rundown on rally style driving as well. We're in Dirt Rally 2 here. Let's get going.
50, 2 left long.
Now what you'll notice straight away is that things are a lot more chaotic in terms of just the sheer amount of input, the sheer amount of things that are going on. But the thing that I wanted to highlight here is the fundamental difference in the style of feedback that you're getting, because on dirt in particular, the car is sliding around. You don't get those sudden snap changes of direction like you do on roads. So what I found is that even though there's more movement going on, you don't get the sensation of the car floating underneath you as much as you do on roads. So I find a system like this seems to inherently suit itself better towards sort of drifting, which is something that I'm not particularly good at doing. So I'm not going to actually cover that in this video, but I think you get a sense from the style of driving that I'm doing here. You can see
6 left long.
the movement of the car is more dynamic, more sort of gradual, even though it's more chaotic in many ways.
Right long, opens of a crest. Into 6 left
So we'll
long
get
of a
back into the
crest.
dirt in just a second, you'll see, but I just get a good
6 left long,
sensation
tightens cut to
of the
ground.
way the car's reacting to the surface and the way it's moving around underneath me. So let's get back onto the
Opens of a
dirt.
crest, 30. 5 right. Into 3 left of a crest, don't cut. Into 5 right of a crest.
And it does
Opens long, 30.
genuinely make it quite a lot more immersive too. So while I feel like the traction system is something that I could take or leave for road racing, I don't really feel like I'm missing a whole lot without having it. Although it does add some detail, there's no denying that. On dirt roads like this
Into 4 right tightens.
is really where I think it comes into its own. So let me just drive for a little bit here. I'll just let you kind of watch what's going on
30.
and get a sense for it yourselves.
6 left. Into 4 right long. Into 3 left long. Tightens, don't cut. Into 4 right long. Opens of a small crest. 30.
Oh, hit the fence.
Crest. Into 6 left long. Tightens. Opens. Flat of a crest. 120. 3 right. Opens of a crest. Into 6 left. 50. Caution. 2 right tightens.
A nice little slide there to kind of give you a sense of what I'm talking about.
Into 2 left. Opens of a crest, 80. 6 left of a crest long, tightens past junction, continues very long, and caution, tightens 2. 30. 4 right long, opens of a crest, very long. Caution slow, 30. 5 left long of a crest, tightens 2. Opens 50. 6 right.
So one more thing that we need to talk about is motion compensation and how it pertains to triple monitor setups like this, where the monitors aren't actually fixed to the rig. I think the majority of people are probably going to find that they will be over the weight limit once they add in a monitor stand and monitors. So most people are probably going to be running a freestanding monitor setup, let's just say. So this is an area where we did run into a few issues. Now, we built our own solution. We actually have a video dedicated to that in its entirety, so I encourage you to check that out. I'll drop a link above my head and in the description for you guys. But just to give you a quick rundown on how this works. So, as the motion platform moves, obviously your position relative to the cabin of the car is going to move as well. And this is one of the things that Niels, in his video, which I would recommend you watch because it raises some very important points, which we'll discuss in just a moment too. I'll put a link down in the description for that too. One of the things that he mentioned in that video, which was absolutely a problem for us too, was the fact that when you've got a platform and a cockpit that's moving around in space and I guess desynchronized from the cockpit of the car. So as you can imagine, if your physical cockpit is moving around but the perspective on the screens isn't, then that's going to create this weird disconnect where you're kind of just like floating around inside the car like you've got a broken chair. And to demonstrate that, let me just reach down here and unplug this little connection here. And if I move the platform around now, you'll see what I mean. The car is moving, but the perspective on the screens is not. And you can imagine that is very, very strange. But if I plug this back in, we actually created our own solution to this issue. Now, the fact that we had to create our own solution, I think, is unacceptable for the price point. I really do think that, you know, for a $10,000 product, they need to have a solution for this that doesn't require a DIY thing like us. But we have a video where we went through all the details of exactly what we did, how we made it work, and how we adjusted and everything. So again, I encourage you to watch that. But just to give you a quick rundown on it now, you'll see up in the top left-hand corner there a little track IR receiver and then a transmitter down here. And what it's basically doing is it's emitting infrared light out of 3 points here. Those 3 points are then mapped by the receiver, and any deviation from center is detected and automatically moves the screens to compensate. So you can see if I wiggle that, the perspective on the screens also changes. And if I move the platform from side to side, you can actually see now the screens are adjusting their perspective to match what's going on with the cockpit, and that makes an absolutely massive difference. That was really what made this work for me. Now, admittedly, the effect is exaggerated with such massive screens, and most people aren't going to have the problem to the same extent that we did. That is one thing I want to make very clear. But needless to say, you know, if you're moving around freely inside a cockpit like you've got a broken chair, it's not going to be giving you the best experience. Now, in my opinion at least, and I'm happy to be corrected on this if I'm incorrect, but you know, all the telemetry information's there. You've got the data coming in from the platform. It knows its position in relative space. I don't see any reason why the software itself couldn't have a compensation algorithm similar to what we have for VR, which adjusts the perspective. We know from the Track IR software, it is possible to control that perspective. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly the reason why we don't see that. And I do feel like it's something that should be included for the price, because, you know, you don't want to go and spend $10,000 on a product and then have to go and spend more money just to kind of make it work in the way that I believe it should work out of the box. So again, we've got this motion compensation system here. It did take us quite a bit of time to dial in the settings. It was easily a day's work to really get it, you know, perfected, and it's not perfect. I mean, it does have its limitations. It doesn't respond absolutely one-to-one, and you'll see that in a lot of our videos where we're running the platform. Occasionally, if we've got a sudden crash where the car's twisting and throwing around or rolling, something like that, you do get a bit of a, I guess, disparity between what you're seeing on the camera in terms of what's on the screens and what's in the cockpit. So just something to be aware of again, and something I do think they could definitely improve. Whoa!
That was awesome.
That was genuinely terrible.
It looked so good on screen.
Did it? Look, in terms of the quality of the hardware, you know, this is a European manufactured product. It's manufactured by Motion Systems EU and then rebranded to Next Level Racing later on. And they make, you know, big industrial motion systems for, you know, professional sim racing rigs, flight training systems, all kinds of things like that. So there's definitely no problem when it comes to the quality of the hardware. I think, you know, it does what it's designed to do very well. I think probably where some of the problems come from is more the fact that people's expectations might be a little bit too high. And I don't want to sound like I'm defending it, but time and time again, we see these videos from trade shows where we've got motion rigs that are just throwing the person around, and it's absolutely crazy. And it looks really cool, looks really immersive on camera. But the reality is, you know, as I was kind of saying before when we were driving, you know, the amount of movement that's going on and the amount that it's throwing you around can actually take away from being able to drive quickly and consistently, because it's just increasing the noise. It's almost like trying to listen to music with screaming kids in the background or something. You want to be able to just focus on the things that are important to enjoying the experience and not be completely overwhelmed with chaotic noise that's not necessarily adding to it. So I think, you know, less is absolutely more when it comes to motion, and that's I guess the thing that's been drummed into me time and time again as I've spent more time kind of going in and fine-tuning the settings. Now, another point that Neil's raised in his video, which I thought was a really important one, was the impact of what he called inverse effects on the experience of sim racing. Now, what he means by that is when you turn the wheel to the right, so say you're going around a right-hand bend, naturally in a race car, as you do that, you're feeling G-force pushing you towards the outside, so the left. So you turn right, you get pushed into the left-hand side of your seat due to centrifugal force. So what is happening here in the motion platform is kind of trying to simulate that. So as you turn to the right, the back end of the rig moves out towards the left. Now, that may seem correct because it's what happens in real life, but what this comes down to is a bit of a mindset thing, because in a sim rig, and what Niels is saying is absolutely accurate, when you are pushed by centrifugal force to the left-hand side of your chair as you turn to the right, you're actually feeling the pressure on the left-hand side of your body. So you're being compressed by the G-forces into the left-hand side of your seat. But what's happening on a traction loss system like this is because you're not having sustained G-force pushing you out, it's simulated G-force. Because your body doesn't have actual G-force forcing it into the left-hand side of the chair, you're actually feeling the pressure on your right-hand side. So you can imagine you're sitting in the chair starts to move around to the left, so it's actually pushing you in the right-hand side. So you're actually feeling exactly as Neil said, you're feeling an inverse effect, because normally you'd be squished into the left-hand side of the chair, but you're actually feeling the pressure on the right-hand side. And what I would say is, you know, what he's saying there is very accurate, but again, that comes down to the difference between, you know, high-level G-forces or sustained G-forces and, you know, just a sensation of movement. And as you saw, you know, we're not really simulating G-force here at all, and I think that's probably maybe where his theory falls over just a little bit. While I definitely agree with him that you are feeling the force differently to what you would in the real world, again, it comes down to what we're actually trying to achieve here is, you know, giving your brain just those little cues it needs to understand what the car's doing underneath you, rather than actually trying to simulate the movement of the car per se. So I think, yeah, when I actually experimented with, trying to inverse the effects to, recreate what he felt would be correct, it actually just felt really weird to me. And that could just be because my brain wasn't used to it. But again, I think it comes down to what we were talking about before, where, whatever you give your brain to interpret as a cue to, understand what's going on with the car underneath you, your brain will adapt to that over time. So in a sense, it almost doesn't really matter what's going on. Your brain kind of just correlates, okay, when I feel this, it means this is happening in the car, if that makes sense. So yes, what Niels is saying is right. It is definitely a limitation, but I think we just need to break away from that mindset of trying to simulate the vehicle dynamics, so to speak, and more trying to simulate the sensation that you actually feel underneath you. And again, less is more. The less movement you have, the more accurately you're able to simulate, just those fine little details and what you need to understand what the car's doing. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I've explained that clearly enough. I think it kind of makes sense, but yeah, it is definitely a limitation when it comes to at least this kind of a motion system. And I'm going to be testing out some full motion systems over the coming months as well. So I'm very excited to see how they compare. But I guess to summarize my thoughts on the Next Level Racing Traction Plus system, I think, if you have your heart set on a traction system, you're ready to spend the money, then it's a good system. The hardware quality is great. The software integration is really good as well, aside from the motion compensation or the lack of motion compensation, which, you can add in as we've demonstrated, but I would like to see that built in by default. I think really it just comes down to understanding what those limitations are, and hopefully we've clearly demonstrated what they are in today's video. And, I don't think that it's necessarily being pushed as doing something that it doesn't do. I wouldn't say that it doesn't deliver on its promises by any means. I think it's just a matter of understanding what those limitations are and, I guess managing expectation around those. So ultimately the cost is something that will be prohibitive to a lot of people. Some people might have the cash laying around and ready to spend on their sim rig and wanting to know how to best invest it. And what I would say to those people is that it hasn't added as much to the overall driving experience in terms of driving consistently and quickly as I'd hoped it might have. My initial impression was that it might actually, once I got used to it, enable me to go a little bit faster and a little bit more consistent just because I was getting those extra cues. But what I've found the more I've used it is, it's just kind of taking that information away from one area and adding it to another. So it's giving you a bit more information through the seat of the pants, and that might be great for some people. Some people might greatly prefer that. For me, I found that I was just as quick just relying on visual and what I'm feeling through the wheel. So it didn't really improve my lap times, didn't really improve the experience in that sense, but it definitely did add a lot to the immersion, particularly for rally style driving, those kinds of styles where there's a lot of movement going on, you're really getting thrown around. So I think the best way I can summarize my feelings is this: if you have the money to spend and it's not prohibitive to you, then by all means, you're gonna get a more immersive experience, you're gonna enjoy it, and I don't think you're gonna regret buying one of these by any means. I think it is a very good quality product, even at the price point. When you consider the amount of hardware you're getting, the engineering, the software and everything, I can understand why it costs as much as it does. But is this something that I would prioritize over, say, a high quality set of pedals, better quality wheel and wheelbase, or a more solid rig? Absolutely not. I think that this is the thing that you buy when you already have everything else, I guess is the best way to put it. So regardless of whether you're looking to buy one of these or just interested to know a little bit more about what it's like to drive with a setup like this, I really hope that today's video has helped you out. If you do decide you want to buy one of these, we do have some links down in the description below where you can get a 5% discount as well as a small commission coming back to us to help out with the cost of running the channel. So thank you very much for the support there as well. And yeah, guys, I really hope the video's helped you out. So leave a thumbs up if it has. Make sure you're subscribed as well so you don't miss future videos. We are going to be pulling this off the rig at some point in the next couple of weeks and testing out a D-box motion system. So really excited to see how that goes as well. And also really interested to see how we can integrate that in with fixed screens too, because I think that might actually be a little bit more challenging than what we had with the, I guess, two-dimensional space that we have here. All we have to deal with is left to right movement, or yaw in this sense, whereas adding heave in as well is going to add a whole new challenge to integrating with this fixed screen setup and making the content as immersive as possible. So stick around for that one. That's going to be a challenge. It's going to be certainly very interesting. But that's it for today, so we'll see you again soon. Bye.